So in Steve Turner's Imagine a Vision for Christians in the Arts, he constructs five concentric circles with entertainment that Christians should feel free to create. The outer circle he calls pure entertainment, and that's anything from a silly farce to some of the superhero films, hopefully some of the superhero films, just pure entertainment, pure enjoyment. Second circle, pro humanity. That would include nature documentaries, something like March of the Penguins, anything that is pro life force. If you've ever seen Sullivan's Travels, those are the films that Sully tells the studio execs he wants to make from now on, instead of disposable entertainment. The third circle is when we start getting down to basics of biblical teaching. Such topics include peace, love, forgiveness, and reconciliation. The Veggie Tales generally operate in the third circle. And especially, remember when they had a run on NBC and a lot of people were complaining about, oh, I can't believe they're doing Veggie Tales. It's like, dude, if a kid likes Veggie Tales on NBC, guess what? They're going to probably ask mom and dad to get the videos. This is before the Netflix deal, of course. And even after the Netflix deal, people complain that they've been neutered. But realistically, come on, the Veggie Tales, any Veggie Tales stories on TV or Netflix are probably going to drive kids to want to see the videos. And when they get to the videos, you're going to get to some clear biblical teaching, mostly drawn out of the Old Testament, except for their Christmas video and their Easter video. The fourth circle, you start to delve into primary theology. And this is a little bit more complex issues that shouldn't have to deal with yet. Original sin, free will, the existence of a spiritual realm. Believe it or not, there was an episode of the Bertie Mac show back in the day that was called Sin Cup, and it explored the concept of sin. It was a great episode and very clearly presented not just biblical concepts, but also the concept of sin and Christ's work of redemption for us. And then finally, when you get to the fifth circle, you have the cross. And this is the hardest one to do well. One of the more recent films that has done this extremely well, and it's kind of crazy who made the film, is Dead Man Walking, which was directed and adapted by Tim Robbins, starring his then common-law wife Susan Sarandon, and also starring Sean Penn. And even though these are three of Hollywood's most notorious liberals, because they set out to tell Sister Helen Prejean's story accurately, the gospel is preached, and I was stunned, astonished, and delighted that the redemption story comes through. Even on the movie poster, it says he wanted to save his soul. He wanted to save his life. She wanted to save his soul. And Matthew Poncelet is the convicted murderer who has murdered two teenagers. It's a fascinating film. I highly recommend you watch it. And then visually, here's what these five concentric circles look like. Notice that the concept of concentric circles, if you're in the middle, the cross, you should also be conforming to those other four circles: primary theology, clear biblical teaching, pro-humanity, pure entertainment. Here are some tips for redemptive writing. Beware of didacticism, and I talked about this in our structure lecture. People don't go to movies to be preached at. They go for entertainment. Therefore, you've got to bed your controlling idea within the fabric of your screenplay. So if you have entertained them once and taken them on a journey, they will accept the message, hopefully, that you've been getting at in your writing. When I deliver this lecture in person, I tell them here in Los Angeles, people don't even go to church to be preached at, which is sad but true. You know, church is a time of fellowship. You get to see your friends. You get to hang out. You get great music, free childcare, inspirational message. Sometimes Jesus' name comes up. I'm oversimplifying, but there is a lot of fancy tickling going on in churches throughout America that are not necessarily clear biblical teaching. This is a quote I also use in the structure lecture. The story tells you its meaning. You don't dictate meaning to the story. You don't draw action from idea, rather idea from action. You've got to embed your controlling idea in that crisis climax pairing. Therefore, when you get to that moment in the script, you, as a writer, and hopefully the audience, will experience one of the most powerful moments in the writing life: self-recognition. The Greeks called recognition anagnosis. It's that moment in a classical tragedy where Oedipus or Hamlet, because Shakespeare kind of knew his Aristotle and really constructs Hamlet based on Aristotelian structure. It's kind of the moment where they smack themselves upside the head. I could have had a V8. I know what I've been doing wrong. Too bad almost everybody's going to die because of my stupidity. I'm thinking of Hamlet when he jumps in Ophelia's grave toward the end of the physical Act 4. I would argue it's structural Act 2. But when he jumps in Ophelia's grave, realizing that it's his fault she's dead because he's treated her like and he accidentally killed her father because he acted rashly instead of intently. And Laertes, on the other hand, is going to fall right into Claudius's trap and do his dirty work for him, and basically almost everybody except for Fortinbras ends up dead. It's not a happy play. Second tip, beware of earnestness. Today's audiences are suspicious of overly earnest people, TV shows, films, etc. Your message needs to seem real and genuine. And we have two types of storytelling at our behest, prescriptive and descriptive stories. Prescriptive stories are we tell our audiences how best to live their lives. Or we can warn audiences and try to steer them away from danger. Sometimes those tales are referred to as cautionary tales. I would argue that Breaking Bad, I nickname it McMath, but Breaking Bad really is a cautionary tale. The pitch Vince Gilligan gave to AMC was, I'm going to take Mr. Chips, the prototypical great teacher, and turn him into Scarface, the prototypical mobster. And as we see Walter White descend into, there's no other name for it, evil, the body count rises. Be sneakily subversive. Judd Apatow's films, The 40-Year-Old Virgin and Knocked Up, they're both really raunchy movies. They're R-rated comedies. Yet, if you dig beneath the raunch, you have a fairly moral message in each case. 40-Year-Old Virgin extols the benefits of abstaining from intercourse until you're married. When they get after their wedding night, they have fun, they're crude. It's funny, but there's some truth to it. And then Knocked Up, I like to think of as kind of a paraphrase, or the message is kind of a paraphrase of 1 Corinthians 10. When I was a child, I thought like a child. I spoke like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put aside my bong, put on my big boy pants, grew up, and became a responsible human being and contributor to society. And if you look at Bruce Almighty, which was a big hit for Universal, Jim Carrey's Bruce, he's kind of a jerk. Not kind of a jerk, he's a big jerk. And yet, when you go on the journey with Bruce, when he has his encounter with God, and God grants him a portion of his powers for a brief time, Bruce is redeemed. Evan Almighty, on the other hand, is problematic because Evan starts off a kind of nice guy. And even though the idea of the retelling of the Noah story in modern day, it's an intriguing idea. And by the way, was originally written as no connection whatsoever to the Bruce Almighty film. Universal optioned it, bought it, rewrote it. When Jim Carrey passed, they rewrote it for Steve Carell, whose star was rising. But, Evan Almighty doesn't have the appeal of Bruce Almighty because Bruce is already a good guy, so his encounter with God doesn't really make him a better guy per se. It just, he's tested, but it's problematic, and it was a big dud, box office wise. One of our last tips comes from Jesus himself. Be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves, from Matthew 10:16. Actually, I misquoted 1 Corinthians 13, not 10. My bad. When talking about when I was a child, etc., etc. At the end of the love chapter, which is often used for weddings. I love the way that Eugene Peterson paraphrases this in The Message. Stay alert. This is hazardous work I'm assigning you. You're going to be like a sheep running through a wolf pack, so don't call attention to yourselves. Be as cunning as a snake, inoffensive as a dove. And sometimes I think we as Christ followers are harmful as snakes and not doing it well. So be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Finally, the last piece of advice comes from Bishop Robert Blackburn of the United Methodist Church. The job of a pastor is twofold: to comfort the troubled and to trouble the comforted. And I really love this notion. My best friend from the Navy chaplain Frank Holly, he's now a Methodist pastor, and he actually performed my wedding ceremony a couple of months ago. But when I first met him 30 years ago, this was part of his sermon in Yokosuka, Japan, and I've never forgotten that. And I often share it with my students. I think that edict, that admonition, is not just great for pastors, but also for artists. Comfort the troubled and trouble the comforted.